Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Early AI podcast. My name is Seth Earley.
And I'm Chris Featherstone.
And today we're really excited to introduce our guest to discuss industrial products, industrial manufacturing, product data, product information management, and how these types of approaches can be used, AI approaches can be used in that particular space, especially when we talk about improving product data. So we'll talk about use cases for that. We'll talk about generative AI and data privacy, and we're also going to be talking about solution execution and deployment. So our guest today is an expert and visionary in the field of AI and industrial manufacturing. He's currently serving as the CEO of Endeavor. He has a remarkable career that includes both working with prestigious institutions such as the U.S. Air Force and studying at the University of Pennsylvania and the Wharton School of Business. His professional journey also included stints at AWS and Palantir, where he honed his skills in leveraging advanced technologies to solve complex problems. Sahitya, and I didn't ask for your last names. Senapathy. Senapathy?
You got it.
Did I get it? All right. Sahitya Senapathy. Welcome to our show. Nice to have you.
Thanks for having me. Really excited for this.
Terrific. So, we like to start off by trying to understand what are you seeing in terms of misunderstanding, especially in this industrial product space? What is it that people are not getting, or that you have to go in and explain? What are some of the misconceptions about AI, generative AI, and industrial data?
Wow, getting right into the meat. I like it. I think the really interesting thing is folks just aren't familiar with what generative AI is, and what happens is this causes a bit of confusion because people think chatbots are the panacea. They think that ChatGPT is going to solve all of their problems. And so when we walk in and people are talking about use cases, people are like, hey, should we, be talking to a maintenance manual, right? And when we think about, why we actually want to implement generative AI, at the end of the day, in the industrial space, it really comes down to ROI. How are you driving, top line sales, or how are you saving me costs and reducing my OpEx? And the reality is that chatbots aren't going to get you there, and that's usually the first misconception that we have to handle. How can we use generative AI to drive real ROI in real use cases?
And so how do you go about that? Where do you start when you go into an organization? And so they think that the chatbot is the answer, but obviously there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done. It's conversational interaction with their data, using things, using their own data as opposed to the LLM itself or the generative AI itself. But where do you begin that process when you start talking to companies?
Yeah, really good question, because when you're dealing with enterprises, it's often the case that you have a bunch of different stakeholders. And so, I'll put it into two broad buckets of people who are going to be vital to this process. The first is IT, information, right? They're going to be the ones that have the governance and understanding of the data that's around the organization. And the second is the business case user, whether we're talking about the sales department or the operations department, the supply chain department that's in charge of procurement. And you need both of these forces to come together to come to an understanding, because to really solve these problems in enterprise manufacturing, you're dealing with issues around siloed data. You're dealing with issues around messy, unclean data sources in different ERP systems. And what this means is that not only are you feeling the immense pain from a business use case standpoint, but you're also seeing the effects in the IT department, and they're struggling too. And so our process always starts with discovery with IT and with the business case users to identify, where are you feeling the pain in your business? Where can we improve your margins? But what does the kind of data layer look like that is creating this issue for you?
And do you want to provide maybe a specific example of where you will find those kinds of opportunities in a manufacturer? And of course, industrial manufacturers many times are not at the leading edge of technology. They're spending more time on manufacturing processes and making investments in their operations. And many times IT and technical capabilities lag a bit. So tell me a little bit more about what you see on the ground and what those specific needs might be.
Yeah. So I'll kind of give you the IT standpoint and how this ends up manifesting in the business use case. With the IT folks, you have this accumulation of legacy softwares in the industry. So you've got ERP systems, right? Your enterprise resource planning like Oracle and SAP. Then you've got the manufacturing execution systems, the MESs. And then you introduce all sorts of different unstructured data sources. And this is actually the long tail of unstructured data, is really where generative AI comes into play as a massive infrastructure force multiplier for these companies. And you've got email, you've got spreadsheets, you've got Word documents, you've got PDFs, and every single manufacturer, whether you're talking about small mom and pop shop that's on the street across the corner, or you're talking about the biggest manufacturer with 30 plants across the world, they have this problem where different plants that have come together as a result of M&A activity have different ERP systems, they have different MES systems, they're collecting different sensor data on the shop floor. Every person at the plant's got their own spreadsheets that they're doing analysis in Word documents, and the first step is kind of just analyzing this. And I'll give you a tangible example. Let's say we're dealing with sales folks, right? And we've identified, hey, there's a problem with a lagging sales volume for the last 5 years. We want to start automating our sales workflows. What this means is we start looking on a plant by plant basis, and the results might be, hey, you have different product catalogs in different ERP systems. One plant might be on SAP, the other one's on Oracle, and there are discrepancies in the product catalog, and there's unreconciled master data. How do we start to unify all of this data using generative AI as that infrastructure accelerant, and then use that to start automating the workflow to drive higher sales volume? And that's how that kind of process looks.
Yeah, I think you're on mute, Chris.
Yeah, that would be helpful. So Sahitya, when you dive into it, I can only imagine that also some of the misconceptions come from the from the FUD, right? The fear, uncertainty, and doubt with a lot of these. Because Seth, you brought up a good point around that this is not their core area of business, technology. Their core area of business, like you said, is manufacturing and industrial. So how do you take them from from understanding like their core aspects to they know they want or need, or they have all this AI that's being articulated to them? What kind of process do you use to actually take them from from basically almost a trust, but into an area where they're like, you know what, Sahitya, yeah, I need what you have, and I know that I need this, but I don't know how and why. So what's that process look like to get them to that point of pulling the trigger?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because we feel the strongest pull from the types of manufacturers that have actually tried to build this in-house. There's this legacy of companies and kind of software providers that are out there that essentially do a custom development and then do a handoff to the manufacturer. And this is kind of part of the problem in this space because you've got all these one-off legacy softwares that someone has handed off to a manufacturing enterprise, and they're not in the business of software maintenance. Right? This is why we had the SaaSification of industry, because we had dedicated providers who actually maintained products. You have all these point solutions that exist. And so there's still people in the industry who are trying to build their own solutions in-house because they think it gives them an advantage, because they can vertically integrate their software stack. The reality is that it doesn't. It's harder. But when they kind of try building it, then they realize the difficulty of actually building and maintaining a generative AI product, let alone a traditional SaaS product. Then they come to us and they're like, we understand the problem. We know the use case. You're just going to be better equipped to do this sort of thing and maintain it for us. So that's the first kind of layer there where it really accelerates the kind of process. Now, the second level, how do we actually get everyone comfortable? Well, in terms of we finish discovery, before going into an annual contract, let's do a bit of a proof of concept or a pilot, right? Whatever you want to call it. Let's actually get this into the hands of users so that not only can the executives get confidence that, hey, this is going to be a real ROI driver for us, let's actually get the people who are using it acclimated and comfortable with the idea of using this tool day to day. Because there's no point in putting out a generative AI tool for the sake of it if it's going to be shelfware. Let's actually get something that people are using every day and feel like are adding true value to their operations.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, part of that too is just, like we do with most use cases with these different orgs, is the crawl, walk, run, right? Figure out what this looks like from the technologist that can implement it, help them understand, what that is, drive the value, work backwards from that solution, right? And then actually, like you said, put up a proof of concept, some type of an MVP that makes sense so they can, continue to get, additional investments. So, in terms of I mean, that's pretty standard, right, across the board. Where have you seen, like, whether in industrial manufacturing, where does it take a little bit longer in some cases, or what does that look like? Especially, I mean, because you're dealing with these huge organizations, right? And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I mean, I'm assuming that process is the same, but is there any nuances, to this type of technology and help them over the hump of understanding?
Definitely. There's kind of a lot of different layers to it. I think the first is in manufacturing, you're dealing with enterprises that have lots of different plants or locations that have various processes and data sources from plant to plant. And our approach is, why don't we go piecemeal? Let's start with 2 plants to start out with, and then expand this across your organization. And we've done this, right? We started with 2 plants, and now we are deploying enterprise wide. And that's where the true benefit is, but it really helps them kind of slowly move into it. And I think this is something very interesting about manufacturing because of that dynamic, that M&A dynamic that leads to these really large companies. Um,
Yeah.
I think the second thing there is like, can we accelerate implementation? And generative AI is also a great internal tool for us as a company, right?
Mhm.
Can we, develop proof of concepts for you faster, by using generative AI to accelerate our software development process, which means that you can start seeing what the tool is like next week rather than, 3 months or 6 months, which is, traditional.
Do you find that it especially manufacturing, because it's been the lifeblood of America for a long time, right, in the U.S. and I think it's easier, and my comment is, we'll preface a little bit of context, but it's easier for a lot of SaaS companies and technology companies to figure out what to do. And like you said, I like on your site where it says, um, chatbots won't make you money, but Endeavor will, right?
Mhm.
And that has to be part of, like, we'll get into a little bit more in terms of handling data. But, is there anything unique to maybe their data? Because we have, I mean, I'm assuming schematics, and we got, like you said, all their unstructured data can be very, very complex and yet, pretty simple as well, right? And how do you help them understand, like, what could and should this look like, right? In terms of actually, let me scrap that. Let me go back to something. So Carolyn, note the time of that one. I think the one thing I want to, key into.
Fix it in post.
Yeah, exactly. Fix and post. So the one thing I want to key into, with this Sahitya is, when we start talking about these, the lifeblood of America for a lot of history and stuff is, like we talked about, it's not their core to be with technology, but they're forced. Do you find that helps accelerate, or does that hinder the process at all?
I think it's really interesting because, to your first point, yes, manufacturing and trade, these are the core of the American economy.
Mhm.
And one of the things that we've seen over the last several decades is we've gone from being this manufacturing powerhouse post World War II to now being more of a services economy, right? And you know, it's interesting because we've also seen global competition rise over these sorts of things. And we're based in Silicon Valley, Endeavor, and there's a lot of activity now around manufacturing. And you have these new age manufacturers that are trying to produce missiles or tanks, right, in the Silicon Valley style of things, move fast, break things. But really, the bedrock of the American economy is those traditional industries in the Midwest, like the steel, the construction, the automotive, right? And you know, they are the companies where I feel like they can most strongly benefit from AI. And you'd expect, kind of from the outside looking in, if they're based in the Midwest, they're not on the coast, they're not on the West Coast, East Coast, there's going to be less tech saturation. Maybe they're more averse to technology. But it's really interesting because you go into them and they recognize the problems and they understand the potential that technology has. It's kind of just a question of how are they equipped to solve those sorts of things. And coming back to that point, which is, build versus buy, the folks are going to try to build it. They're going to try to build out their IT departments. They might go to individual consultants, but in the long run, it's just better off if you go to a provider who is, interested in the long-term maintenance of the software, in actually driving the daily usage rather than, doing a time and money implementation, because then they're just going to drag it out. And I think it's, a cultural thing. There's been so many manufacturers that have just been burnt by industry 4.0 sort of, what was the thing? Digital twin. Digital twin was the big thing a couple of years ago. And the reality is that it hasn't especially delivered quite yet on that ROI thing I was talking about. Has it delivered top line revenue or cost savings? And, I think we would be hard pressed to find out, if there's a single company that did that especially well. And my hypothesis and, why we founded Endeavor was because, the problem isn't analytics. The kind of technology behind analytics has not really fundamentally innovated, in the past 10 years. But the problem is data. It's actually, are we using the right data? And the question is, can we bring that unstructured data in and actually apply the kind of technology, the analytics, to really deliver on this digital twin and the industry 4.0 technology? And the way I'll give you a concrete example of this in manufacturing is there's, a lot of these manufacturers, again, in the bedrock economy have 10, 20 years worth of data, and they should be using it. And, they've got this data that should be mined from their emails, their requests for quotes, their bill of materials, that's stuck in spreadsheets. And you can start to do better forecasts. You can start to do better analytics. You can start to do better planning by mining this unstructured data and using it in a combination with the structured data they've been using for their existing planning. And that's how I think we really get to amazing solutions for analytics, for forecasting, using generative AI in this manufacturing space.
I think, Seth, this is near and dear to Seth, right? In terms of knowledge management, knowledge graphs, knowledge infrastructure, which I would argue in that space is probably pretty immature, right? And so, I just in the organizations I've met, they're just barely getting to, okay, we've got our data warehouse up, all fact and dimension based, that we've been driving off our transactional system. And yet, to your point, all that unstructured data that's sitting there and the decades and decades worth of information that's either NoSQL, unstructured, or is structured, and they aren't doing anything with it to try to find those patterns, And I would argue too that maybe even not knowing the right question to ask of the data is probably more indicative of, what to do with it, right? So, yeah.
So I have a question. Give me a sense of a capability. And those are good points, by the way, Chris, in terms of the knowledge infrastructure and so on. But, give me a sense of what a capability would look like that you leave a customer with. Like, what are they able to do differently at the end of the day?
Yeah. Let me kind of walk you through like a journey of what an enterprise customer might experience with Endeavor. And we think about it
without making the commercial.
Yeah, of course. We think about it in three phases, which is, the first layer is data. What are you able to accomplish with data? And what you're able to do is bring in your siloed data sources. You're able to start unifying, data that's in different schemas, different databases, different formats, and in PDFs and spreadsheets in a structured format, which has historically been, impossible to do without generative AI, right? The ability to tap into different formats and unify them and standardize it. Now, what you can do using that data, the data is just a means, is start automating
Not that
your
it was
workflow.
impossible. It's costly and it takes some work. We did a project for Applied Materials where we integrated 14 different data sources and gave us unified front end to that, a search-based application. And it takes a lot of work. But you also have to have good content and data lifecycle management. But in any case, Gen AI gives you some new capabilities in that space. But continue, carry on.
Sure. And I think what you can do using the kind of data is start to automate, right? And that's immediate time to value, which is you take this data, now it's standardized. Can we replace, something that's labor intensive for us so that our existing personnel can focus on higher value tasks? So for example, you have a massive team of account executives that both interface with the customer, but they also are in charge of quoting. Can we shift their focus to doing more customer face time, work on order improvement, product recommendations, and reduce their menial workflow for generating quotes using the generative AI technology? Now, the final layer there is the analytics piece, which is really what everyone wants at the end of the day. As an executive, what you want to understand is, what does my sales forecast look like? what products are going to be high in demand and what are customers going to request. And now you can tap into all that data that you've automated. You've structured that unstructured data into PDFs and email and spreadsheets. Now let's start driving insights and analytics so that executives can make better decisions. And that's kind of the 3-step phase that we think about.
Okay. And so again, when you come back to what's going to be different, can you give a specific example? I mean, in terms of, you mentioned sales forecasting. So you're saying that it would be easier to do sales forecasting with fewer steps. What else would there be an impact on the customer experience? Would there be an impact on the employee experience in terms of, again, integrating these different structured and unstructured data sources? So, is there a service component of this? Is there a self-service component? What are the kinds of things that you're seeing really get traction with customers?
Yeah. So at the automation layer, again, it's immediate time to value in the sense that for quoting, right, you can immediately push out these quotes, which means traditionally your customers might have to wait a week or 4 days before they get a quote. And they're kind of just twiddling their thumbs trying to get, what is this going to cost me? Now you can start to immediately respond and almost get a frictionless, touchless experience that your customers are really going to appreciate because it's faster. Same for your inside sales reps, right? They're going to be able to interface with the customer and actually get more face time so that your customers are talking to people instead of talking to a machine. Now the analytics piece is a bit different because it's not only the ability to forecast better, but it's the ability to amalgamate all this information you hadn't been able to do before. Because like you said, you can do it, but it'd be very costly to start using that unstructured data. And now you can do so in the same sense of traditional analytics, where you can do big data analytics, but you can do so with unstructured data in the same way that you'd be mining numeric data, now with the non-numeric.
Yeah, because that time series data is going to be super critical for planning and for, predictive planning, but the supplier piece. I think what's interesting too, Seth, just in terms of a lot of this is, and Sahitya is centered around, I feel like especially in a lot of ERP and a lot of supply chain, a lot of these types of technologies, these classic legacy technologies, they over-index on planning, they over-index on potentially logistics, right? And things like that, like supplier planning, goods on hand, all that kind of stuff, but they don't on the actual real-time manufacturing piece. Like, what does that look like in terms of the flow, what's happening, real time, what's going on right now? And then how does that give me the ability to predict what my output is going to be? At the same time, look at it from the perspective of supplier management coming in, looking at goods on hand from their perspective and what that can give me. Because I think we get like the planning right, but it's all those other aspects and the connective tissue between them that lose focus. Is that a fair assessment, or is that, like, am I missing it?
No, I think that's absolutely right. I think planning is the end all be all. Everyone wants to do better planning. It's just a question of, do we have the right data?
Yeah.
And it's about bringing those different processes, those siloed data sources, and connecting the different ERP systems. It's really hard because of the lack of standardization, using the unstructured data on hand to drive better decisions.
Yeah, because you have all that real-time stuff hitting the conveyors and coming through in a classic, let's say, supplier type of perspective. But then, when that gets into the actual manufacturing floor, and then you see your Kanbans decreasing, and then that adding to the output of the products that you're doing. Part of that's I mean, you may be, the best part about this is your suppliers are feeding you, and you may be a supplier for something else. And part of that too is making sure that predictability for your downstream is also there. And then, Seth, to your point, you got all of the HR and employees and engineers and everybody that's centered around the gravitational pull of what the core product is to actually generate all this stuff and then get answers quickly, right? Because it's the most critical thing is, hey, what in the hell is going on within my company right now, and I have no idea, so I need to be able to see that. But anyway, yeah, it's interesting.
So, yeah, and when you think about what you're trying to do there, you're trying to speed up the information flows throughout the enterprise and get people the right information that they need when they need it. The old mantra of knowledge management and personalization and contextualization. How do you go about fixing that data? You talked about the fact that it needs to be standardized. What does that process look like?
So we do what's called a forward deployed motion, which means we embed very deeply with the client. And often we go in person to visit our enterprise clients. And I say we don't do a deal without actually visiting our clients. And it's very important to actually go meet the folks that are in charge of the data, to view the data, to actually kind of like, start, experimenting with it, and then look at the schemas, look at the columns, understand the process, and then start unifying it into one thing that is standard. And then you can really accelerate the process of this schema standardization, this data cleaning using generative AI, which I think is new, right? It's laborious to do without, but you have a long history of these ERP companies that focus on standardization. But if you can now start to actually have a semantic understanding of a process and of a data table and the associated schema, well, then now you can start to reconcile different tables when there are variations from plant to plant and location to location business divisions.
It's interesting. So do you see that across like, more relevant across, let's say, the sales quoting side of things, or material planning, or, just pricing and order entry? Where do you see that as the most applicable?
We really see that sort of thing on the operations side for manufacturing. There are going to be variations on the sales side for sure. There's going to be different product catalogs. There might be different processes, but for the most part, ideally, you're quoting the same way from plant to plant, at least 80-90%. But when you get to operations, it's kind of the Wild West, because again, these companies have probably been around for a long time. They're almost like, you got 4 or 5 different companies under the same umbrella, and they've been doing things for the same way for the last 30 years, and they're still operating that same way. And when you look at a different region, you might look at, the division in the West Coast and the East Coast. They may have completely divergent strategies for producing a particular good, which means, figuring out the materials that you need for it, figuring out how to actually use those materials to produce good, then scheduling them on your shop floor. And the idiosyncratic processes that exist from plant to plant and location to location is really where the kind of fractured systems come into play, and the lack of information.
I would argue, how many of those are just managed by a single spreadsheet in each one of them, right? With their own process, their own models, whatever, but all done in a spreadsheet, and with the worst file system ever, email.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. I would probably guess 100%. I would be hard pressed to find a single manufacturer that does not use Excel.
Which, you have these huge systems like SAP and Oracle, and yet everything's still sitting in Excel as their day-to-day work productivity tool, right? And that's what they're going through, which is, is scary at the same time. As that's just what, how things have been done. So continue to do that.
Yeah, well, it's funny because you could probably just ask someone, in Silicon Valley here, hey, what do you think is the most used software in manufacturing? And they might be like, hey, is it Oracle? Is it SAP? Right. But the reality is, I'm from Texas. We've actually been out there in the real world. It's Excel. It's actually Microsoft Excel and Outlook.
And then all reports are done through PowerPoint.
Yes, exactly.
Right? That's interesting. So, I don't know if it's a good time to get into it, because I think one of the other aspects to, Seth, that we often, kind of dig into with these is, do you see, or maybe the better question is, with a lot of these organizations that are also still that have trepidation about AI, what do you see about them in terms of insecurity around data sharing and data privacy and all those kind of things? Because they kind of go hand in hand, right?
That's a really great question, because it always comes up on that first conversation. In fact, I think it's not even about cost. It's about data. Like what's going to happen with our data, because you have all these horror stories. For example, like Samsung, employee puts in some proprietary data into ChatGPT, and there's leakage there, right? It's not protected. And the first thing we get is like, who owns the data? And our answer is, you own the data, right? We're not a Facebook, we're not in the business of reselling or sharing other people's data. You own the data that goes into the model. And we don't do any data sharing. And usually that's the biggest concern people have. Are our insights, the learnings from our data, going to improve my neighbor's business? Because we don't want that, and we don't do any of that. Even though there are other companies that are in the business of doing that. Doing a group pool of data and improving their models based on that. But our systems are architected such that you don't need to. The second layer of that is your traditional, security and data management best practices. Like, do SOC 2 type 2. Make sure that you're hosting everything through, a good cloud provider. Make sure that you are hosting things in the right data centers and doing, the right kind of encryption at rest and in transit, and hosting data in the right kind of sources.
Yeah.
And without those sorts of best practices that we have a great lineage for, it doesn't really make sense to be in the business of enterprise sales.
So define irony that we're worried about our data and data security. However, we haven't touched that data in 20 years.
Yep.
Right.
And go ahead.
No, go. You're good. You're good.
It's interesting because this also leads to the next question of prem, right? Which is everyone wants. Yeah.
So yeah, because now it's not only is it, like you said, not only is it we haven't touched it, but we're super insecure about it because we don't want anybody to touch it, but it's sitting in a bunch of prem systems. Going back to your original point of who the hell is going to be there to manage all of that and keep it updated, and it's still on disk. Hell, maybe it's on magnetic tape somewhere in Iron Mountain. You know what I mean? And they don't know why they do it, but it was the best practice of the day, right?
Yeah. When I think about it, there are definitely some areas where it makes a whole lot of sense to have prem, right? If you're one of the big auto companies and you've got some proprietary designs and you really don't want anyone leaking those designs, like keep that prem. If you're Coca-Cola and you've got your secret recipe, obviously it makes sense to lock that up. But if we're talking about ordinary data, having it on-prem and then trying to deploy a local model like a Llama or a Mistral and bring that in from a prem standpoint, because you want generative AI, but you still want to maintain your data sovereignty in your own hardware, it's just extremely challenging. And the kind of compromise that we often get to is, hey, let's deploy this in your VPC, in your virtual private cloud, right? It's a hybrid prem solution. You can deploy a language model in their cloud, but they can maintain the kind of network and security that's associated with it. And that's a happy medium for these large enterprises that care about maintaining the kind of data privacy and sovereignty.
Yeah, that's
I mean, at the same time, there's so much that's in the cloud that people are kind of used to the fact that you have to secure your data. I mean, you're using cloud providers, you're using software as a service, and this is in a way no different, right? Because you still have to have compliance with security standards. You had a very interesting set of experiences. Sorry about the cat in the background. I don't know if you can hear that, but no, you can't. It's amazing. It's really loud. And you can, good microphone. So you had some interesting experiences in terms of internships and early in your education. You want to talk a little bit about that? What did you kind of go through when you were a teenager and you did some interesting internships? Let's just reflect on that a little bit. You want to tell that story?
Happy to. I started coding when I was 11, and nowadays this is not entirely uncommon. But unlike a lot of my friends who got started early and built a video game or a mobile app, the first app I ever built was for FEMA, the government agency. And I can tell you the story here. We had a tornado rip through Texas. From Dallas, and a lot of tornadoes come through, and the roof of our house got ripped off. And 11-year-old me is talking to my parents like, hey, why haven't they fixed the house yet? What's going on? And they're like, oh, like FEMA, whatever, X, Y, and Z. So I took my parents' computer and I emailed the guy at FEMA, and I was like, hey, you guys got to fix our house. And I had my parents drive me 40, 50 minutes down from Dallas to Denton, and I went and pitched the guy at FEMA. And I think there's like some news article about this, but I was like, you guys should digitize.
What did you pitch to him?
So I pitched him. I was like, why is it so slow? And the guy's like, all of our processes are running on paper. We have a lot of phone and communication overhead. And I'm like, you guys should digitize this. And so I built them. The first thing I ever built was this
So you
app.
walked in the door as an 11-year-old. Like
I did.
usually you hear, they didn't know how old I was. We never did anything on video. They just saw email. But you actually walked in there and they see a little kid, or
Yes,
you look all
yes.
through your age.
There's a picture, if you search my name up, with me at I don't know, some like 4 feet tall, and this actual adult, this FEMA chief. And no, it's a crazy picture. And I go in there, and it's one of the most incredible starts of the journey there, because that's how I got started coding. That's why I'm interested in traditional industry. I don't know if you've got that picture pulled up, but you can see the
I
FEMA.
don't. If you want to pull it up, it would be great.
I will.
I'd have to
I will.
spell out your name here. Oh, here it is. Let me just.
Yeah, I got it.
You got it.
Yeah, sixth grader helps develop a plan for first responders.
Yep, that's the one.
Yep, that's great. We did, not unlike other government agencies and stuff. I was pulled into pandemics, which again, in I think that was 2007 or 8, all a paper process, like you said. And it was amazing to me that that's what was acceptable. How do you, part and parcel to this is, how are you able to respond real time to needs of people, which arguably now we're into the emergency aspects, with using paper and phone, tag, that is processes that could have started in the early 1900s. And this is what's acceptable, right? And I would argue probably we still have some of these processes in place today. But anyway.
Oh, definitely, especially in those DoD and defense realm, even in manufacturing.
So you had a team. You had a team of sixth graders. It looks like.
Yep, me and a couple friends just built this application, and it was great. And we actually won, $5,000 grant from the Army, and I never got an allowance as a kid, so that was the most money I'd ever seen in my life.
That's funny.
And
so then, what did you do? What did you do next? You said you got something for the Army.
I got this $5,000 grant from the Army, and educational stipend, and I got pretty into math, and I started math Olympiad prep, and I became a math Olympiad semifinalist when I was in middle school around this time. And naturally, that lends itself to military. And when I was 16, I joined the Air Force Research Lab at Kirtland Air Force Base, where I worked on a team of PhDs doing deep reinforcement learning. And I put out a paper as well that's out there on how do you apply, and deep reinforcement learning at the time was all the rage, AlphaGo, right? You had autonomously working chess and beating Lisa Dong, who's the Go grandmaster. And of course the military was interested in, like, how do we apply this to our autonomous drones, right? How do we actually have cool tracking software? And I got to work on that, which is awesome, because I grew up watching Star Wars. And I'm a prequels guy, by the way, not a sequels guy. Prequels get too much hate. I love Revenge of the Sith, but I'm working at this Air Force base, and I worked my way up to having a secret level clearance, and I got to work on what I would watch movies about, and that's how I really got into ML from software.
Neat. That's great. And then what did you do after you did stuff with the Air Force, and then what did you do after that?
So decided to actually go to college after spending a lot of my high school just around a bunch of grown-ups. Right. And I went to Penn, and what I like to say is my dad's a businessman, my mom's a scientist. Wanted to make both of them happy, so I decided to do the Wharton degree and the computer science degree, so that neither one of them got too upset at me. Even though I think they both wish I was a doctor still to this day. While I was at Penn, I interned at AWS, and I got to work on Amazon Q, actually. And that's where I got to work on LLMs. And we were working on this before ChatGPT even came out. And was working on LLM infrastructure, was building some of the core infra in Rust for semantic search, which is really interesting because I'm a Python guy. I've done ML research at the Air Force and interpreted languages, and then you go to the low level of Rust and it's like a completely different ballgame. But decided I didn't want to be a core software engineer after that, so went to Palantir, and that's where I got into the manufacturing space. At Palantir, I worked with a Fortune 200 manufacturer. Did one of the first generative AI implementations there. Was going around the country to different plants, and that's where I really fell in love with the space. because there's so much in the manufacturing industry. We talked about it. It's core to American GDP. It's
Mm.
the real world. And that's what kind of led me to starting Endeavor.
What kind of manufacturer were you working with for AWS?
Yeah, I don't know. So I wasn't working with the manufacturer for AWS, but I was at Palantir.
Oh.
But I don't know if I'm allowed to say. I have
just
to
the
check.
kind, just the feel. Like, what did they ballpark? Like, what kinds? Was it diversified or?
It was I think it was a process manufacturer.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a chemical plant or something like that.
Yeah.
That type of thing. Pharmaceutical. Yeah, very
And it
interesting.
smelled when you go to the plant. The smell just
Yeah.
it just sinks in.
Right. So what do you do for fun? What else outside of work?
Good question. I recently picked up water sports, and
Oh.
it's funny because even though I grew up in Texas, I was born in Michigan, so you'd expect me to be a big skier, but I never really got into it. But I picked up water skiing, and I was telling Chris this the other weekend. But I was water skiing, and I'd never done it before, so I kept falling over, and the skis kept falling off. But eventually, I think I got it, and the boat's taking off, and I'm right behind it, holding on, and the guy's like, hold on, and like hold your arms straight, don't let go. And the skis come off, and I'm like, okay, well, don't let go and hold my arm straight. And I'm just flailing behind the boat like this, and it's dragging me around the lake.
Oh no.
Yeah, no, I mean, incredible experience though, because eventually eighth try I got it, and
Yeah.
it was unlike anything I've ever done before.
Nice.
I've gone skydiving before, which is awesome, but water skiing, it's like in the moment,
Yeah.
and I'll be doing a whole lot more of that, and maybe I'll get into skiing as well.
That's great.
Yeah, we're gonna try to get him on to the other water sport, which is snow skiing.
Yeah. Frozen water sport. Yeah. Well, this has been great. I've really appreciated your time, and it's been a lot of fun chatting with you. Thank you for participating and joining us on today's podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. Love talking about what I do.
You know what, Sahitya, your energy is palpable, my friend, and it carries through. So yeah, it's so fun to hear the excitement in your voice about just all this.
Thanks to folks tuning in to today's podcast. People can find you on LinkedIn, and then EndeavorAI.com is the URL of the company, EndeavorAI.com. And thank you again, Sahitya. It was great to have you.
Thanks, Seth. Thanks, Chris.
Okay. Thanks everyone. All right, we'll see you next time.
Cool.
Okay. Bye now.
Cool.